maybe I could do this. I don't want to be rude. Hope this is okay. Terry, am I okay? Okay, got to get Terry's approval. Okay. I'm going to read 3 poems today, and the first is by a friend and colleague, not ministerial colleague, poet colleague. We were writing, this is a while back, we were writing poems, and I was in a creative writing program, so there were a lot of us writing poems and writing short stories and plays and so on. And for some reason, I can't recall why exactly, but the theme of My Father's House, or some variation on that title, was just everybody was saying, "Oh, yeah, I'll write one about." Oh, yeah, you know. So Deborah wrote one called My Father's House, and as you can hear, it's very rich with imagery, which some poems are, rich with multiple images. My Father's House, Deborah Bruce. I'm 8, waiting outside for the men to carry away the houses from the yards that A&P bought up. I see them plunging their hands into dark suit pockets by the ramp that lifts each house. The open cellars gape toward our lawn, and Mr. Lyon's front porch grazes our linden as the houses roll down Shaker Road. That spring, the gravel driveway hissed under the wheels each time they pulled up in their long cars. They pressed wide envelopes to their sides and filed into our house to talk to you. We always watched from the hedges as you walked them to the edge of the road. You smiled, balanced your beer can on the mailbox, and shook your head. They built the market anyway. Clipping the strawberry runners, they raised white walls around our windows. The workers on the loading dock wiped their hands and winked, and slabs of veined beef rode by our kitchen on pulley and chain and dripped on the lawn. The summer we moved out, you said you'd rent the house, but never sell. You scoured our smell from the bedrooms and knelt to varnish the floor where the A&P would slide in their silver cabinets and mount adding machines in the windows. I made the monthly rounds with you, a landlord grumbling about electric bills, flicking switches, and leaving each room dark when you left it. 20 years later, I'm waiting for you. Inside the house, I see you set your beer can on someone's desk where a globe tilts under a lamp and North America glows. I'm 28. I'm 8. I watch you open your hands above the world and spin it. I decided to write a poem, My Father's House. And in my case, my father had what was politely called a nervous breakdown when I was a little girl. And so, although there is an image at the end that related to a physical house, the entire poem is about my father's mind, my father's house. There is no key. Experts tried to pick the lock. Chemistry, then electric shock. Even our sister's carcinogenesis failed to trip the latch. My mother, who shaved his calloused feet, cries dry tears. He won't come out. Wouldn't answer the phone the times I did try to call. He's torn the cord from the wall. His castle, I curse from distances, cry for it alone, forget. I visit, though never getting closer than across a moat-like road. Once I raced back there hoping to sneak in through an unlocked or broken window. None were more than cracked in corners and all jammed shut. My father's house stands stone closed. Still, honeysuckle climbs the side porch rails, dares to smell as sweet. The last poem I'll read you is by Theodore Roethke. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a wonderful poet. He died over 50 years ago now. In his poem, My Papa's Waltz, there's a very clear image, yet depending on the perspective that you're looking at from, you may hear the poem as a joyful thing for a little boy, or a bittersweet thing for a little boy, or as an adult, perhaps more bitter than sweet. It's all in the listener. My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Roethke. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. You may have noticed that the hymns that you sang today were all poems put to music. The current U.S. Poet Laureate, in case you didn't remember, flew out of your head, huh? Tracy Smith. And California has an opening. Doesn't have a Poet Laureate right now, so hey, could be you. Denise Levertov, who was one of my teachers briefly when I was an undergrad, she said I was a very good poet, but I was damn lazy. And she was sort of right. I think if I had been true to myself and written and felt free in my heart, maybe I wouldn't have appeared to have been so lazy about it. But I will say that poetry saved my life as a child and was more of that kind of a thing for me, cathartic in a way, throughout my childhood. My first poem, I remember the first verse. It was 4 verses when I was 9 years old. The occasion was the old Columbus Day. We don't say that anymore. Indigenous Peoples Day, but at the time. And let's see, the first verse is all I remember. It was, I am Queen Isabella. I'm 49 years old. My husband's name is Ferdinand. He is strong and bold. The rest is... But poetry did save my life, and I think that part of what we need to understand about poetry, at least I feel, is that poetry is, for some folks, a way to make sense of things that feel otherwise impossible to make sense of, or to articulate the contradictions in one's being of what's going on within them or beyond them. The poems that you heard read earlier today, that Paul read, Begging the Rocks, was by Nathan Fish, who is a son of this congregation, yes? Now, maybe you don't all know that. And Piper Cook's poem that Stephanie read. Stephanie read Piper's poem, and Piper is another young adult now, but child of this congregation. And I think you could hear in both of those poems a kind of reaching out, a kind of making sense or trying to articulate that which does not make sense in our lives, or that causes us difficulty. And it's a way sometimes for some of us to see our lives more richly than we might otherwise. Besides saying that I was a lazy poet, Denis Levertov talked about poetry as words that encompass our experiences, that the content and form of a poem live in a dynamic state of interaction. And what that means simply is, you know, for me anyway, my Papa's Waltz is in a rhyming, metered form, and some of us don't do that very well, but there are many forms, some of which actually help people shape their ideas. You know, a sestina has many, many requirements to it. It's a very long form with rhyming internally and externally. So, but for some folks, they grab onto that form for a particular expression to get certain metaphors across about their lives or about what they observe in the world, where other people are more free-form. Like myself, I generally am, as you might imagine, kind of free-form. So what about metaphor and poetry in your lives? Now, do any of you dabble in writing poetry? I see a few hands coming up and around. Yes, okay, good, good. I'm glad to see that. And I'm sure it has different meanings for all of you. I would like you all to just sit for a moment, though, excuse me, and think about your life as a metaphor. In other words, right now, it doesn't have to be your whole life. It could be, but even just right now. If you were to write about your life right now in one sentence as a metaphor, and I bring this up because, you know, I was listening to NPR the other day, and Terry Gross was interviewing a conductor, Yannick Netzet-Segin, if that's the way he pronounces his name, I'm not sure. I think he was born and raised in Philadelphia, and he's now a conductor in Philadelphia. And he's explaining how he talks to his instrumentalists when there's a certain section of music that he wants them to do a little differently. And what he has come to understand in his work is that, for example, he would say to them at a certain section, he'd say, now this is a field of tall grass, and a breeze, a gentle, warm breeze is blowing through it and bending the tops of each blade of grass just a little bit, and they gently bounce back. And what he was saying to Terry is he would say something like that, and he knew that he could have just said, legato here, meaning more smoothly, but to use an image, he said, drew out so much more from people than simply saying, legato, here. So you're thinking about metaphors for your life as I'm speaking, and is life for you today like a gentle breeze? That's a simile, like. Is life for you a simple breeze blowing gently? Is life for you today a field of spring blossoms? Is life for you today a dark alley with broken glass bits and potholes? Is life for you today a cellar, dank, lonely? Is life for you today a blossoming rose? Yes, with thorns, but also with the great beauty of the petals in bloom. I think it's hard for us sometimes to allow ourselves to just stop long enough to think about our lives. It's so much easier simply to say the facts. Like Deborah Bruce could have said, you know, my dad was approached to sell his house so A&P could have a bigger store and a bigger parking lot. And he said no. Through his lifetime anyway, it didn't happen. Until later, much later, it did, when he was gone. She could have just said that. But how much more rich and telling her use of metaphor, her use of imagery was. And I could have just told you my father had a nervous breakdown. It was hard to talk to him when he wasn't, dealing with it. Could have said that. It doesn't begin to say what the experience is. And that's where poetry and metaphor work in my life, to help me explain, to share, to actually be able to articulate something that's going on inside me about my world and the world around me, all of it. And I'm not suggesting that everybody become a poet or see themselves that way, although, I think living life, we are all, to some degree or another, poets. It's not about the written word, after all. It's how we see our lives. So I invite you to think about that. Not just now, but later. And if you've resisted and you say, okay, that's nice. She's telling us to think about poets. Go ahead, indulge me. Just sometime in the course of the day, let yourself just experience whatever you're experiencing, good, bad, indifferent, how you see your children, how you see what you're doing, how you see your circumstance, and how you can describe it more richly. A beach isn't a beach, not just a beach. It's not just sand and water. It's not just sand and water and waves. It's not just sand and water and waves and broken shells. What does the sand feel like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? And the water? And the sun, or lack of it? What do the clouds look like? Are they broken? Are they large or small? Are they low or high? I invite you to observe your life in that way of detail and looking for the metaphors that help you share more deeply what you're living with, the joyful and the sorrowful too. Celebrate the poetry of your lives. Our lives are rich with it, however informally and however puzzling that may sound to you right now. Our lives are filled with metaphor and poetry that gives it such richness, fullness. So we're going to switch gears now and have a moment of sharing the weekly responsibility of donating your financial resources for the week that you can. But actually, before you get that money out there. But did you find another person to help? Kim's going to help. So first, what's going to happen is before the ushers come forward to collect your dough, Michael and Kim are going to walk around and pass the basket. Poetry in Your Pocket is actually the 18th of April, but that's like a Thursday, and forget that. So please take a poem and put it in your pocket. There's a mix of poems, no searching through, just grab one, put it in your pocket, and enjoy. And when they're done, I'll ask the ushers to come forward and talk a little bit about the stewardship. Feel free to trade poems later. It's a kind of sharing. You know, you read it, you enjoy it, pass it on to somebody else. And I have a feeling there'll be leftover poems, so if you think of somebody that you wish would have been here today or that you will see later, feel free to take one. We'll leave them on the back counter, and feel free to take one to give to someone or share the one you got. And Michael, you can leave it at the back, on the back counter, Michael. Yeah. Just leave, when they're done, you can leave them on the back counter. It's still coming, they're still coming. Get your red hot poems here. Get your poems. Get your red hot poems here. I was thinking of sort of like, telling you, it's sliding scale $2 to $5. No, I wasn't really. Take yourself a poem. Hey, I'm going to the Warriors game tonight, so, I'm in the, sort of like Barker kind of mode here. Get your poems here. I can't eat any of the food, but what the heck? The game will be good. Did Jim Aiken get a poem? Did Ting get a poem? Did Ting get a poem? She did? All right. Everybody got a poem. Okay, thank you. Just put them on the back counter. If anybody wants one later, feel free to take them.